So, schönen guten Tag. Hallo, welcome.
Hi.
My name is Oliver Gorf. I am the director of the Goethe-Zentrum Atlanta. Goethe-Zentrum Atlanta is a German cultural center and a language institute, and we are situated in Atlanta, but really we are responsible for the whole southeast of America. So wherever you are right now, whether you're in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina, welcome. Of course, I'm not alone here. I have two guests with me that I would like to introduce to you first. And we will talk today a little bit about the topic that you see in my background. And that is, Ich bin ein Berliner. It's a life experience, multimedia, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, by Vanessa Garcia. Vanessa, hello, is one of our guests. And we will show this play on Friday, November 12th at 7:30 p.m. at the Rolecall Theater at the Ponce City Market in Atlanta. Before that, it will also be shown in Miami on the actual day of the fall of the wall, Berlin Wall, on November the 9th in Miami. I think at 2 and at 7 p.m. Is that right?
Correct. 2 and 7. So the students can go in the daytime because it's going to be on a campus, and in the campus in the middle of downtown. So 2 o'clock for that reason, and then 7 p.m. people can go after work. So
cool. And so you're welcome to go there or to both if you have a good plane. And then there is Tom Erhardt. Tom Erhardt is, amongst many other things, the director of the documentary The Forgotten Treasure, Der vergessene Schatz. That was a documentary that we showed on October 6th in Atlanta about a Brazilian art collector, and his collection really consists of a huge amount of art from what was formerly known the German Democratic Republic or the GDR, East Germany. And the reason why we showed that documentary on October 6th is because that was a few days after the anniversary of the day of reunification. And the reason why we show Vanessa's piece in Atlanta and Miami is because it's the anniversary of the actual fall of the Berlin Wall a year earlier, around about on November 9th. But there's also another reason why I have the two of them together. First of all, because they were both parts of our Unity Day series, but really because both of them have experiences with the fall of the Berlin Wall, very different ones, maybe. Probably. Tom grew up in what we now would call East Germany, and so was behind the wall, if you will, when the wall fell. And Vanessa is about the same.
Though.
Sorry?
That depends on your perspective, though.
From a Western perspective, and from Tom's perspective, he was, where were you then?
Well, you were behind that wall.
Ah, got you. That's true. And then Vanessa was, if you will, behind the wall, very far away, or in front of the wall, very far away. And as a Cuban American, really somewhere, or her family had been in some sort of other wall behind or in front of, as much as you want to interpret it, before that. And both of you were kind of the same age. Both of you, Vanessa in Miami, Tom in East Germany, not in Berlin, but close to it, witnessed probably what happened. And this is really what I wanted to talk to you about. How was it for each one of you? And how did it feel for you, Tom? It was probably physically closer. When did you actually notice there had something changed on that day, November 9th, 1989?
I think it was on the evening news. I remember sitting in a bathrobe, I guess, on our sofa, and we were watching the news, and my parents were saying like, well, now it has happened, you know, this is what's happening. But it had been announcing itself a little bit in the weeks and months before that, because there had been these huge demonstrations in Leipzig and later in Berlin and all the other cities. On Mondays, always the "We Are the People" chants, they were all over the place. So you knew something was happening, and East Germany would open itself up in some kind of way. But I think nobody really had guessed that it would happen in this kind of way. If it's, you know, this kind of misreading of this one note that Schabowski got in that moment, and you know, everything that happened afterwards, maybe it would have taken a little bit longer, but yeah, it was quite a surprise that it happened in this way. But I think for my parents, it was even a more emotional moment than for me, because they had always told me, well, maybe the wall will fall in your lifetime, but certainly not in ours. And then it just, then was just gone. So that was, yeah, that was that moment. But we didn't rush to Berlin in that moment. We waited for a few days until we went there.
How old were you? Around?
I must have been, so I was 89, so I was 11. I was almost 12, so I was 11.
Same. Yeah. So we're the same, we're the same age.
Yeah.
I was around 11. Yeah.
And you were in Miami at that point.
I was in Miami, so you would think that I have nothing to do with this in the sense
No, but
of
you were already
from,
on the other side.
yeah, apart
Right.
from, you know, the
Yeah.
knowledge of and the news and whatever it was. But I remember watching it in my classroom.
Right.
It comes on the television, they stop everything, you know. We had Channel 1 News, you know, they show it in the school. It's sort of like a loudspeaker, turn on the TV, and it had already been happening. It's just that this is the first time I remember seeing it, and I got extremely emotional. Like, I started crying, and I didn't understand why, because here I am, this 11-year-old kid, and you know, I didn't really get it, why I was so moved by it. And of course, this whole piece is about figuring out that it has everything to do with the fact that my parents are Cuban, and that very much a similar idea of my grandparents, for example, saying, you know, I'm not going to see a free Cuba in my lifetime. Maybe my grandchildren will. Maybe, you know, this sort of like freedom that everybody has been fighting for generations, and this invisible wall that, you know, lives between us. And then right now, in this particular moment in time, you know, we're having a kind of, it feels like a Berlin Wall moment for Cuba, because people are going out into the street and protesting against the regime, and it's something that hasn't been seen before on a, you know, the world hasn't seen it, because it's sort of been hidden behind this veil. So it feels a very there's something that's connected, you know.
Yeah. But you were born in the States already.
I was born in the States in,
Right.
you know, like we say, another province of Cuba called Miami. And that's essentially where I was born, in Miami. And at that point, I had only been to Spain, because Spain was ironically the other closest thing we could get to Cuba, because it was where my grandfather had been born.
Right.
So really at that point, you know, and I'd been to the Caribbean because my father was a shoe salesman. That's just kind of like, you know, this little world that you're in by that point.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And then you guys you as a family did go to Berlin several days later. How was that?
Yeah. It's really hard to say, because we didn't actually go to see the wall, or to see we didn't go there to pick out, you know, pieces of the stones or whatever, you know. We didn't dismantle the wall, you know, with our bare hands or something like that. I think we just went shopping because everybody got like 100 marks at that point. And I was such a music nerd, and I had always dreamed of having my own cassette recorder, and I bought a cassette recorder for 100 marks, and that's how I spent this. They called it the welcome money, and I just spent it in one go and didn't buy anything else. So that was great. But I saw a piece of Berlin where I have rarely been ever since, and that is Tegel, the district of Tegel. I've been to the airport of Tegel, of course, but the district not so much. So it didn't even have anything to do with the Berlin that I later got to know as an adult when I moved there to study and to work. So yeah.
Did it feel markedly different for you?
Oh yeah.
Either, yeah. How?
It smelled different. It had, you know, the colors were different. All of these, yeah, it kind of, we had these shops in East Germany that were called inter shops, where you could actually, it was like a small West German supermarket where you could pay not with East German money, not with West German money, but something that was called forum checks. So if for some reason you had West German money, you'd have to go to a bank, exchange that for these forum checks, and with these forum checks you could buy something in that store, which would usually be like, I don't know, records, soap, candy, something like that. And I mean, there was soap also in East Germany. It always gives the impression we didn't have that. We also had records, but not all of them, whatever. So it really, West Germany as a whole, or West Berlin in that moment, just smelled like these inter shops. It smelled like, I don't know, washing powder a little bit, you know, a little bit like that. There was a lot more perfume in the air. I remember that. And yeah, apart from that, there was nothing really that stuck to me. I think the thing that I liked a lot more was when we actually went to West Germany to visit my father's, my uncle, my father's brother. And so we were in a totally different environment, because West Germany in some ways is still, you know, is Berlin. West Berlin is also still Berlin. So some of the things you knew, they just looked a little bit shinier. They looked a little bit nicer. They were kept in a better shape. But, you know, to just go to that other part of Germany and essentially being in a foreign country, at that point it still was, yeah, because we went in May and they were still different countries at that point. It was the first other country that I've been to was West Germany. And to realize that we are the same people, and this is all, you know, that's the same, and this is also your country now in some kind of way. So that was all, you know, a weird moment for me to process all of that. But I was wondering, like, when I got I did a high school year a few years later in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places.
Wow.
And there was not much of a sensibility of what Germany actually is, or Europe. You know, people would say like, oh, Germany, that's in Russia, and you would go like, oh, where do I start? And yeah, so but you had, you know, an image of what this means, apparently, right? So what this means is this Cold War seemed to be coming to an end.
I mean, because we lived in the middle of the Cold War as Cuban Americans. I mean, it is a sort of satellite state of the, you know, there was canned Soviet meat in Cuba. Like, everyone that would come over would have all of that was happening, you know, like that was imported from the Soviet Union, you know, like at the time, my childhood, everyone who was coming over was giving the information that they were giving us. Even what you're talking about, the shops, like right now I'm interviewing a bunch of Cubans that grew up in Cuba, and they talk about, like, you know, of course in Spanish it's like they'd have to go to el shopping, and you know, like you could use a different currency, but you know, or US dollars, but you didn't have those. And then, you know, the one thing that you could purchase, and then, you know, it's all these layers of similarity that really, you know, it does feel like this last little piece of that Cold War has always still existed 90 miles away from the southernmost point of the United States, which is, you know, where I grew up in Florida and Miami. And so I just feel like that was always, it was very connected. When the Berlin Wall falls, everybody, I mean, you know, in 1989 in Miami is like, oh my God, it's going to happen. That's it. Like, Cuba's going to be free. Communism's going to fall everywhere. And we're going to get to go back there. My father, you know, started to say, we're going to spend half the year in Cuba and half the year in the United States. And that's all going to happen. Yeah, that's not going to happen. It never happened, but there were songs that came out, and You know, there was one called Ya Viene Llegando, which people still sing. It's like, oh, it's coming, it's coming. And we're still waiting. Yeah. So, you know, it's very, and the division of families, when you were talking right now about your uncle, you know, it's that division of family is also very, very clear for us, about what it means to have families split by essentially this wall, you know, that we still have, which is the Florida Straits at this point, you know. So yeah, it was very present. It was very present. And even though, you know, at the time I couldn't articulate all of this, I felt all of it. And I think that, you know, I felt my parents and grandparents' emotion, and they were all younger then and still had hope. You know, by the time Castro died, for example, I remember going to my grandmother and showing up at her house, and she just was like, well, you know, where the energy was very different before, you know. So I'm curious to know what you were perceiving of your parents at that time, because obviously they had lived this longer than you, who was, you know, 11 at that point, or had seen a pre and post and middle and all of that. So
I grew up in a pretty enlightened family, I must say. So from a very young age, my parents always told me what the Stasi is, the Secret Service of East Germany, what they do, and what I could say in school, what I could wear in school, or how I would get into trouble if I would say this or do that or whatever. And my dad had a friend who had a copy machine in his basement, and he was copying these underground fanzines that were basically just, they were not really fanzines, but these underground newspapers that went, that were, I don't know, fighting for environmental cleanups and things like this. It wasn't even that political, not political, so, you know. And so they always told me, like, if you want to travel, for example, you have to be an athlete or a journalist. And I was a pretty chubby kid, so the choice was clear. So so my parents, they thought, as I said, like the wall wouldn't fall in their lifetime. And when it did, I think everything changed for them. I mean, even my parents, I think, were at a good point in their life, I guess, because they were around, like, they were in the end of their 40s, maybe, beginning of their 50s, something like this. So they had some, of course, it was difficult. There was a lot of unemployment, and my dad especially was struggling to find employment. My mom was a nurse, so that wasn't really a problem. Nurses are always needed. And but for example, for my sisters, who are 10 and 13 years older than I, for them and their generation, I thought it was really it really screwed with their, not screwed with their brains, is the wrong term, but it was really it was like the wrong moment. They had just decided what they wanted to be in life. They had just decided on a career. They had married. They already had children in the beginning of their 20s. They are wonderful children. I love my nephews and my niece, but surely if they had been at my age, they might have chosen something different for their life, you know? And so I think, like, my generation of Germans at that point, this was like the sweet spot. We got all the good stuff from East Germany, because growing up there as a kid was pretty good. So you had, like, these summer camps that the state would pay for, and everything was, you know, the things that you grew up around with was, we're going to end wars. We're always going to have peace in the world. All the, you know, nations will unite. You were holding hands with all the kids of the world. And, you know, it was before reality really hit and you knew which country you were actually living in. And then the wall came down and everything was restarted, and we had the whole world to choose from. So my age, plus minus 2, 3, 4 years, I think that was the generation that benefited most from that, you know. So for my parents, still, they never really traveled that much in their life before, and afterwards they were just going to all the places that they wanted to see. I don't know, Madeira, or to, I don't know, like walking the Alps. They are, you know, hikers, and they like to do that, and go to Italy and eat a pizza in Italy, you know, just do it, you know? That was their thing, I guess. But they were trying to hold it together, because the times right after the fall of the wall were pretty hard, especially in the countryside of what was East Germany.
I can imagine. Yeah, I think about that, in terms of like what there's a moment, right? There's the actual moment where this thing happens, and then there's all that blurry time before and after. And I always wonder what, it's not so much wonder as really, really, really think and project about what is going to happen if that happens to Cuba.
One thing that I remember also is that we were, or my parents were pretty disappointed. I was maybe too young to really grasp it, but the people who brought on the change that led to the fall of the wall were people who were they actually wanted to experiment with a new kind of socialism, with a new kind of communism, perhaps, to see if you could modernize this into another. They didn't really want Germany to unify again, this whole thing of we are the people, what they were chanting, wir sind das Volk, that was taken over very quickly after the fall of the wall by this movement that was shouting, we are one people, they wanted the same currency, they wanted Germany to reunite, they wanted to be annexed as fast as possible. And I think for the people who were actually fighting to bring that change, or were maybe of the same state of mind as those people, that was a huge deception, and that caused, I think, like a rift between between people in East Germany.
Yeah.
How's the Vanessa, in your piece that we're going to see on Friday in Atlanta and Tuesday in Miami, how does the story, don't give anything away, but are there changes of perception of the fall of war? Is this climax, is that a highlight and then there's more disappointment, or is it still a light that shines somewhere as a possibility, or how does this for you and for your parents' generation?
Yeah, I mean, for us, really specifically, I keep thinking, I think of my grandfather a lot when I think about this piece, because my grandfather, first of all, I mean, it's really, there's a lot wrapped in that, but he was born in Spain. He fled Franco, literally crossed the Pyrenees on foot with his brother, reached France, goes into foster care with his brother. World War II hits, so flee another tyrant. And then he makes it to Cuba in a very roundabout way, because he gets to actually Ellis Island, right? But that's not the end of his journey, because in Ellis Island, he pretends that he's Cuban, so they don't send him back to Europe, which is, war, they're in the middle of World War II. And so they pretend that they're Spanish, the two brothers, Cuban, and they get on a ship to Cuba and they make a life there. When Castro starts coming into power, they see, obviously they were anti-Batista, which was the dictator that came before Castro in Cuba, but, they wanted democracy in Cuba. They wanted to return to, a 1940 constitution, which was what they had, come into at the time. And they were against, my grandfather for most of his life would say, I'm an anarchist and an atheist and no tyranny of thought, all the things, then he died with a crucifix under his pillow, but, that's another thing. But he actually died on my birthday, which was the premiere of this show in Miami. So he feels very much a part of this, this piece, and the whole, he really did believe, and I think he inculcated that in me, and that there cannot be tyranny of thought. And so there is that hope, I think, in terms of what at least we, as a lot of artists in Cuba right now are fighting against. And on the other side of our wall, the artists in Miami and all over the world, really, that have anything to do with Cuba and are in the diaspora. I think that a lot of people are referring to this moment as the Berlin Wall of the Western Hemisphere. Like they're speaking of it in a very specific way because of what's happening right now. As of July 11th, this piece came out specifically because I knew in April that Raul Castro was going to step down from the communist regime. And even though people thought, well, there's a puppet government in place, which is true, but it matters. The weight of those of the Castros and that step down, I think, does matter. And I think there was a sense of something could happen and something may happen. And then, several months later, July 11th happens and the people throw themselves to the street. And then there's a major lockdown and people are imprisoned, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're in the middle of this thing, and I feel like there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of exhaustion, there's a lot of, what are the next steps? And there's a lot of there is a lot of unity, I think, inside and outside the island in terms of it's time for that regime to go.
Yeah.
And that the people, whatever they choose, can actually choose. So I think that's the big hope, at least personally, and what connects from that journey to this particular moment.
Can I ask one thing? I was really wondering, like, why did you call the piece Ich bin ein Berliner? And what is actually, I'm sorry, maybe, as Oliver said, please don't give too much away, but
yeah,
what is actually happening in it?
In the piece, essentially, there's I sort of play with the idea that I'm wondering, like, why do I feel this way about the fall of the Berlin Wall? Am I a Berliner? Is everyone a Berliner? And this, obviously, it comes from the John F. Kennedy speech, the famous speech. But I think there's also this sort of game that I play in the piece, saying, I have this little inner Berliner, and why do I have this inner Berliner? How does what role did capitalism play in it? And jeans and Levi's and what kind, and Coca-Cola, and then also my Cuban upbringing, right? So what are all those layers? How do I unravel and unwrap them all and come to the center of the why of that emotional button that was pressed for me in a classroom in Miami in 1989? So that
But I was wondering, like, your parents came from Cuba.
Yes.
They lived in Cuba, right? So
my parents came from Cuba. So my grandparents and all of my grandparents, except my grandfather, who I just mentioned, were born in Cuba. And then my grandfather, even that one, he considered himself Cuban. And my parents, both Cuban, my stepfather, Cuban, and all of them came in different waves of migration. So, my stepdad's father was a political prisoner in Cuba for 15 years. My Pedro, my grandfather's brother, who crossed the Pyrenees with him and did all that, he was imprisoned for 9 years because he actually stayed in Cuba. And then when he was fighting against essentially anti-Castro activity, and my grandfather spent a lot of time trying to get him out of 9 years, the 9 years that he was in prison, trying to get him out. And finally, when he did leave, he didn't speak words. He didn't speak for 1 year because he had been tortured pretty severely in prison. And so, there's all of that story. My parents escaped Cuba, like they literally, so, when I went to Berlin and saw, all these forms of like the balloon and the suitcase and the ways that people were trying to leave the East, it's very much my parents escaped, they fled in whatever way that they could. So
were they also I mean, of course they were fleeing a regime and so in a way, but were they also running away from this idea of socialism or communism, or is that still also in the family somewhere present, that this is actually an idea that has some merit to it, but in this way you cannot do it, you cannot do anything in a dictatorship, right? But the idea
they were fleeing the regime, the dictatorship, communism, the whole. They were fleeing because it was just, you know, there's no, it's sort of like the song that has come out now, which is, you know, Patria y Vida, which is motherland and life. The slogan for the regime was motherland or death. Like, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
This is it. This is how, you know, and it was an implementation of a system at all costs.
Right.
Or else. And so it was goodbye to that, you know. I should say that my stepdad's was raised by his grandfather while his father was in prison, and his grandfather was very much a socialist. So there was that split in the family, and my stepdad, when he left, because they released the political prisoners at that moment, his father, he could not tell his grandfather that he was leaving, and he never saw him again and never spoke to him again. And not because he wanted that, you know, he definitely loved, that's his father figure. That's the person he speaks about so it's, you know, incredibly complicated.
Yeah. But were they more of a left-wing, more of a left-wing family, or decided conservative afterwards, after they fled the country, or did they?
Oh, you mean after?
Yeah,
no,
but I mean, the dictatorship is one thing, but the ideology, you know, there's more to it than just the dictatorship and how you implement an idea like that. And sometimes people take this idea of general. I know it doesn't really work like that in reality, but like the idea of equality and that everything belongs to everybody is something that, you know, you can carry with you, even if you reject the way it's being carried out, you know what I mean?
There's a complete and utter, they're not left at all. But they're also not, I mean, they're not to the right, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
But I will say that they saw the, you know, the false face of all of that, in the sense of like, there was free education, but then you were told that now you have a debt to the Cuban government and you cannot leave because we own you. Essentially, my stepdad was told he couldn't leave the country because he belonged to Fidel. He could not go. And so my grandfather had to he was in prison and saying he would not leave prison, even though he was being released, unless his son would be released from Cuba. And so all of that is such a, you know, the layers of untruth and hypocrisy for them. There is no way that they are in any way communist or socialists, not even close. I personally am in the United States. As soon as I registered to vote, I am an independent. So I don't, I've always voted blue. So I've always voted Democrat, but I won't ally to a particular party. And I think that all of the stories and all of the, you know, I vote for a cause or whatever, you know, whoever I believe is the you know, whichever portion of the law or whatever that is per situation. So I think that is also, you know, interesting in terms of like, you know, not having a party allegiance. I don't feel that. But I feel that I very much believe in democracy, for example, me, and I do know that I come from a family that has very much taken that in, you know, and they're also very proud to be Americans also, you know, so they're not, I don't know if that answers your question. They're definitely not communist.
It does. No, it really does. But I think like from what you have told me now, it's really interesting if you compare the experience, the communist or the socialist experience of these two different people, like the Cubans and the East Germans in that case, no? And because that may have happened, but I have never heard it that somebody really said that you know, now you got your education here for free, and now we own you, or you owe us. because of that, you know. So I think there's I would be really interested in these slight differences of how things were carried out, and you know, how it actually felt like in the classroom or in the kindergarten or wherever, at, you know, your apprenticeship at work, or I don't know. That's really a super interesting thing, and probably would explode the runtime of this here.
Yeah, and this explorations can be artistic as well as really, in conversations like this one or in other styles. And I think there is a lot to learn. In the end, it seems to me, about the general human experience under different circumstances, where there is, where it always comes out to this moment where people want to have some choice, I guess, or freedom in the end, and what they suffer through to reach that goal. And I think the East German, especially, experience is there a good example, and the Cuban one, in the same way, in a similar way, and a different way as well. And I'm really, while I'm listening to you, I wonder exactly what you say, Tom. There's more to talk about. Maybe we find next year some frame to really go more into depth. And I know that Vanessa was in Germany. Maybe she will go back to Germany. And I also think you will develop this piece, no? Ich bin ein Berliner, more and more.
Yes, I think so. It's not over.
It's not over yet.
Developing still.
Well, it exists as a hybrid audio production, and then the idea is now to say, okay, well, what does it mean on the stage, or what does it mean in another medium? So, you know, I think that it definitely is. It continues to have a future in its present form, and I think others,
Yeah, cool.
No, it's super interesting, and I want to thank both of you. To take a longer time than I expected, but it was really nice to listen to you. And yeah, for everyone who's has become interested, on Friday in Atlanta and on Tuesday in Miami, and who knows where this conversation will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Tom,
for having us.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
And see you soon. Vanessa, by the way, will be there for Q&A on Friday. So
I will.
Whoever, that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to that as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Tschüss.